If you look at various congregations of Mariners fans across the internet right now, you'll find takes like the Mariners can trade for Shohei Ohtani and sign Aaron Judge. But while we love the enthusiasm, such hopes are ultimately unrealistic, and other statements like the Mariners need a left-handed reliever, need to spend X amount of dollars this offseason in order to be successful are just simply untrue. We're going to explain why here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is Wednesday, November 2nd, 2022. This is Ty Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description below. On the show today, we're unfortunately going to play the role of the wet blanket and tell you why Shohei Ohtani and Aaron Judge won't be Mariners in 2023. I know, big surprise. We're also going to address some common misconceptions about what the Mariners need to do this offseason, specifically when it comes to things like adding payroll and the upcoming class of free agent shortstops. We'll explain later on. But Colby, let's start off with the two big superstars who may or may not change teams this offseason. Aaron Judge, of course, is a free agent, or is about to be a free agent. Shohei Ohtani has 1 year left of club control with the Angels and has pretty much said publicly that he's out on what they're doing in Anaheim. Another losing season for them. We've talked ad nauseum about how much that organization is an absolute dumpster fire. And Ohtani seems to finally be coming to his senses and realizing the mistake that he made when he chose the Angels over the Mariners all those years ago. But I don't think he'll necessarily right his wrongs in terms of coming back to the Mariners, crawling back to the Mariners, if you will. Not to sound too Kevin Mathery here, not to talk about hat in hand or anything like that, but. Some fans do want the Mariners to trade for Shohei Ohtani, and Colby, that's just not going to happen, right?
No. It doesn't even make sense. Like, what are we talking about? What does Ohtani's trade package look like? Honestly, it's probably pretty similar to what the Nationals got for Juan Soto. I know Soto had 2.5 years of club control, whereas Ohtani will only have 1. But Ohtani is a number 2 pitcher and a middle of the order bat. He's both. He's arguably the most valuable player in baseball. He's going to cost a ton. And if you're the Mariners, you look at what Juan Soto trade package would look like for the Mariners. It doesn't exist because they can't match that. They can't, not without giving up, probably 2 of Cal Raleigh, Logan Gilbert, and George Kirby. And you're not giving up 2 of those guys or even 1 of those guys for 1 year of anybody. Those are 3 guys who you think are foundational players. There's a non-zero chance that Kirby's going to be a better pitcher than Ohtani anyways this next year. And you're certainly not giving both of those guys to a division rival. It's just not happening. So I think, if it was just prospects, maybe, but anybody trying to float a prospect-only Mariners trade for Shohei Ohtani, they're either stupid or they're lying to you for clicks. Like, it doesn't exist. There is no configuration of prospects that would have the Mariners, acquire Shohei Ohtani without touching their major league roster. I think the Angels are dumb. I don't think they're that dumb. So I just don't see it. And when you kind of look around at like what teams could, afford to trade all that capital for Shohei Ohtani, it's probably the Dodgers, and that's it. I mean, it's a team that, they're the only ones that have the young, MLB players that the Angels would want. They're the only team that also has still really good prospect capital, can afford the $30 million hit on their payroll that he's going to make this year. And they can win the World Series. Like, that's the reason why the Dodgers are really the only team that makes sense. I mean, a team like Texas could try, but do you think that the Angels are going to trade Shohei Ohtani in division? Because, again, I don't think they're that dumb. I also don't think they're smart enough to trade Shohei Ohtani at all. So I don't see the point in trying to trade. And again, it would take, let's just even hypothetically, let's say you could get you can get Ohtani for Kirby straight up. You can't, but let's say you can. Why would you make that trade? You're not significantly better as a result. You just added $30 million of payroll. You've crossed out a couple free agents. Now you have to pay this guy. You only have him for 1 year, and you just gave the Angels a potential number 2 starter for 5 years or 6 years even, because he didn't exhaust his rookie status this year. So it just doesn't make sense. You're not getting Shohei Ohtani, and anybody who's trying to tell you that the Mariners should like go all in on Ohtani and they should trade whatever it takes, those people are dumb. Like, just straight up, they're dumb. They don't see the big picture. They don't understand it. Why give up, again, hypothetically, Kirby, Harry Ford, Cal Raleigh, Ty France, and I mean, it's going to cost more than even that. Emerson Hancock, Bryce Miller, blah, blah, blah. Why give up all of those pieces when you could just go sign Ohtani next year if he's a free agent? You're not guaranteed to sign him just because you trade for him either. So the extension thing doesn't work. There's no argument that could be made that would make it worthwhile for the Mariners to go down this road, unless the Angels are just giving them away. Like, would I trade Harry Ford and Emerson Hancock and like any 3 prospects the Angels want for 1 year of Shohei Ohtani? Yeah, sure. They're not going to do that. So, and I don't care about the extension because you can't, it's not a thing. That thing doesn't exist. The whole trade him and sign him thing, that's a lie.
Yeah, I can see the comments in the YouTube section now already. I can hear you all typing furiously at your keyboards at Colby right now. You wouldn't trade George Kirby for Shohei Ohtani. Blah, blah, blah. In a vacuum, yes, I would trade George Kirby for Shohei Ohtani. But the thing is, you're trading 6 years of George Kirby, just to reiterate what Colby was saying, for 1 year of Shohei Ohtani. The 1 year thing, it really matters. That has to factor into the cost of acquisition. You are not acquiring Ohtani with the intention of extending him, right? Like, you'll want to extend him. You're basically going to put yourself in a position where you more or less have to extend him at that point. But there's no guarantee that he will sign an extension with you. There's no guarantee that he won't test the market. There's none of that. So what you are paying for is 1 year of Shohei Ohtani. That's it. And while Shohei Ohtani is one of the greatest players of this generation and perhaps of all time, it's still just 1 year, and you are hedging a lot because, again, it's not going to cost just George Kirby. It's going to cost George Kirby plus like a Cal Raleigh or someone like that and prospects on top of that. That's a lot of future capital, and you are closing what may very well be a 7 to 10 year window that you've set up for yourself to 3, 5, and really putting a lot
at most
into 2023. Really putting a lot into 2023, basically hedging your future into 2023. That is not good baseball practice. No matter how good Shohei Ohtani is, you are significantly limiting yourself, especially if you are not able to get an extension done, because you don't know that. You don't know that when you're acquiring him. Perhaps the day after he shows up in Seattle, his agent tells you, yeah, we are willing to sign an extension, and that's great. But again, you're not paying the Angels for the extension. You're paying the Angels for 1 year of Shohei Ohtani. So what does that really cost? Now, the Angels, of course, don't have a lot of leverage here, right? Because the writing is on the wall. Ohtani has basically said, I'm out, right? He's basically, like, you can see it on his face when he's playing that he wants out. And so they only got 1 year left of club control. They either have to trade him now or they have to trade him at the deadline, and the cost is going to lower and lower and lower the closer you get to free agency for him. But for a lot of teams, like Colby was saying, from the Mariners' perspective, why don't you just wait until he hits free agency to just sign him, right? Why go for it now? Why trade all of this capital to get him a year ahead of time? And then have to, spend a ton of money on him. So at the end of the day, I'll let you go.
No, I was just going to say, by the way, I think we also need to understand that there's risk to Ohtani staying healthy. He made his debut in 2018, and in 2018, 2019, and 2020, he pitched a combined 53 1/3 innings in 3 years. He This last year was the first year he qualified. He threw over 162 innings, which is what it takes to qualify. This is not a workhorse. This is a guy who has had injury issues. You have to be very careful of how you use him. He's a DH only. He's a great player, probably the best in baseball, and he's only 28 years old. When he's a free agent, the Mariners should absolutely be interested. But I think people also need to remember when they say, oh, well, he'll sign an extension here. He already didn't pick the Mariners once. He already looked at what the Mariners had to offer and said, I'm good. Now things are completely different. So I'm not saying that he would do that again. But you also have to recognize that Shohei Ohtani already spurned the Mariners once. Basically, everybody in baseball thought he was going to sign with Seattle. They had the most money to offer him. They made all those trades to get me even more money. There's the legacy thing in Seattle. There's the huge, Pacific Asian market that gets tapped into in Seattle. Everything was saying Seattle, and Ohtani spurned them. He said, nope, I'm good. Mm-hmm. You can't just assume that he's going to say, yeah, of course I want to play in Seattle. Like, who wouldn't want to follow in Ichiro's footsteps? Literally Shohei Ohtani.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons he gave you. I want to blaze my own trail. I don't want to be, the next Ichiro. I want to be myself. I want to be what Ichiro was to the Mariners for somebody else. He might think that same way. So just this idea that like, oh, just sign him to an extension. No. And by the way, if you're Ohtani, why would you sign an extension? Why would you go out there and just see what the other 29 teams are offering you?
Exactly. And again, when it comes to the actual trade and what you are paying the Angels for, you are paying for 1 year. You are not paying for 1 year and the chance to extend him. You're paying them for 1 year, and that's how you have to look at it. And so when you were talking about what that actually costs, it's just too much. It's too much. You are mortgaging so much of your future. It doesn't matter how good Shohei Ohtani is. You are mortgaging your future, a significant portion of your future. Now, I'm not saying that the Mariners completely shut their window and completely close it off to just 2023 and 2023 alone when they make this deal, but you are significantly capping your ceiling for the next decade by doing this deal. Even if you extend him, because again, you can just sign him next year. You can just sign him next winter. If you really, 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 really want him and you want to spend all that money that it's going to take, just wait until next year. The last thing that I'll mention here before we hop on over to Judge is that the Angels are one of two teams, I believe two, that Jerry Dipoto still hasn't traded with since his tenure in Seattle began. I think there's something to that. Also, there's just general bad blood between these two organizations. I don't think the Angels could justify to their ownership, to their fan base, trading their once-in-a-lifetime generational superstar to the team that they just had like a brawl with and just leapfrog them and basically sun them all year. So this whole point is moot because of that, I think. So let's move on from one superstar to another, Aaron Judge, in just a moment. But real quick, a reminder, this episode of Locked On Mariners is brought to you by Roan. We all know that when you look good, you feel good, but sometimes looking good means putting on uncomfortable fitting clothes that don't breathe and limit your mobility. The dress shirt in particular was due for a radical reinvention, and Roan stepped up to the challenge. Roan's commuter shirt is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible shirt known to man, and here's why. Firstly, mobility is everything. Roan's comfortable four-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way. Secondly, looking good is easy with Roan's styles. It's time to feel confident with a wrinkle-free shirt without the hassle. With Roan's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the shirt. It's that easy. And thirdly, let's talk about Roan's odor-free tech. With Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Roan is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. The commuter shirt can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. Head to roan.com/lockedon. That's LOCKEDON, and use promo code LOCKEDON to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to RHONE.com/lockedon and use promo code LOCKEDON. It's time to find your corner office comfort. You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. So, Aaron Judge, Colby, I'll say this. I think Aaron Judge is likelier to be a Mariner in 2023 than Shohei Ohtani is. That, however, is not saying really anything. Why is Aaron Judge not going to be a Mariner next year?
I mean, just say it out loud.
Yeah.
Aaron Judge is going to pick the Seattle Mariners over the New York Yankees, the San Francisco Giants. He's a Northern California guy, by the way. The Dodgers, like he's going to pick. We already know that those three teams are going to be heavily involved in Aaron Judge's market.
Potentially the Mets as well.
He's going to pick Seattle over one of those teams. No,
I mean, if they grossly overpay, which they shouldn't.
Right.
But yeah.
But again, we're talking about a 31-year-old who is just like unprecedented. We don't have any comps for a guy of his size and his athleticism, how they'll age. They just don't exist. How many 6'8", 270-pound guys play Major League Baseball and can do it well enough where they can play a pretty decent center field into their 30s? Name somebody. You can't. There's no way to know how this guy's going to age. But more importantly, like Ty said, if you want Aaron Judge, like hypothetically, he's probably the guy who's going to get $300 million this offseason. Probably the only one. If the Yankees are willing to give him, or doesn't matter what team, if they're willing to give him 10 and let's just say 350, what are the Mariners going to have to give to get Judge to pick them over those other like just juggernauts, those other iconic franchises? 400 million, 425 million. Are they going to have to break the Mike Trout contract? Maybe. It's certainly possible. And that's just not a good way to build. Spending $400 million on a 31-year-old who is going to lose some athleticism. He just is. I refuse to believe he's that much of a freak that he's going to maintain the athleticism all the way into his late 30s. And there's also questions about, hey, how long can you keep playing at this size? I mean, there's nothing Judge can do about it, but there's back issues, there's wear and tear issues, bigger bodies break down sooner. So there's some legitimate concerns here, but the biggest one is just Aaron Judge isn't going to pick the Mariners. So why bother? If Aaron Judge's agent calls Seattle and is like, hey, what do you think about like 10 and 325? Like, okay, fine, cool. Let's do it. That's not going to happen. Yeah. Aaron Judge is either staying in New York or he's going to LA or San Francisco. It's one of those four teams.
Yeah.
Barring some kind of miracle where he signs a 1-year deal with somewhere, which why would he? Again, he's 31 years old.
And he's coming off of one of the greatest offensive seasons of all time.
Right.
So
he's got to cash in this year. So he's not signing with Seattle. It's really that simple. Just say that out loud. Think about it this way, right? Robinson Cano is probably the guy that people point to and be like, well, he wasn't going to sign with Seattle either until he did. Okay. The Mariners overpaid Robinson Cano. They outbid the Yankees by $70 million. And this was back in what, 2014? 2013. So think about inflation. Think about how much better of a player Aaron Judge is than even prime Cano. And we're talking about what, $100 million? At least 50, 60, 70 million, somewhere in that range. It's not worth it. If we're talking about going over by like, $10, $20 million over what the Yankees are offering, like fine, over the course of a 10-year deal, who cares? It's $2 million a year. We're talking about 70, 80, 90, 100. Those are really good relievers you're giving up. Those are really good young players. Those are players you have to trade away sooner because you can't afford their arbitration. Like, it's dumb. It's a bad practice. And by the way, you don't want to be the team that overpays for players, right? Mm-hmm. You want to be the team that pays fair market value, because if you overpay Aaron Judge, then guess what? Next year when Shohei Ohtani comes around, he's going to say, hey, give me that Seattle tax that Aaron Judge got. Like, it's not going to happen. And by the way, you're not signing Judge this offseason and then signing Ohtani next offseason. That's not happening. So you could just stop that daydream too.
Well, the other thing that we need to mention here too is like the Mariners have to look out into the future too. Julio's going to get more expensive because his extension is going to start kicking in. Cal Raleigh, George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, all these guys are going to start making more money through arbitration. Luis Castillo is making a good chunk of change now. Like, the Mariners have a lot of commitments pushed down the road that they're going to have to account for. This leads into another discussion that I wanted us to have today. And I can hear the tweets. I can hear the YouTube comments once again yelling at us. Oh, well, it's not our money, so who cares, right? Like, the greedy owners need to spend the money. And I get that. Yeah, It's total. It's not our money. And if the Mariners went out and could spend $1 billion on the roster, I'd be all for it. I'd be jumping for joy. But let's get back to reality here. Jerry Dipoto, Justin Hollander, those guys have to work within a budget that is set by John Stanton. So, Colby, we see tweets like this all the time. The Mariners have to get back to $180 million in payroll if they want to be able to be a World Series contender. Colby, if the Mariners don't get back to $180 million in 2022 or 2023 payroll for the Major League roster, are they not winning a World Series next year? Are they not capable of winning a World Series next year?
No, because they were capable of winning the World Series this year with a $112 million payroll. It's not about money. It's about getting the best player you possibly can. It's about not letting small amounts of money keep you from getting players that you really want. Again, if we're talking about like Carlos Correa, hypothetically, right? Like if the only thing standing between you and Carlos Correa is $20 million over a 7-year period, you do that, right? That is what's important, is you give Jerry that little bit of extra money. And also, I think people need to understand here is that the Mariners don't have a year-to-year payroll. They use, like most teams do, this rolling payroll structure where it's basically, hey, Jerry, over the next 3 years, you get $500 million to spend on this baseball team. You can spend it how you could spend 180 this year and 120. You can spend 180 this year and 200 next year, and then you got to drop it down to 120 in year 3, though, because that's how it works. It's a rolling number. So if the Mariners just spend money just to get up to 180, they're going to have less money to spend next year, right? There's a tipping point. There's a balancing act you have to take into account. It's not just, just keep spending money, spend money, because it's just not going to happen. Like, we need to live in a world of reality here. Jerry Dipoto has a budget. Justin Hollander has a budget. And if the budget ends up not being big enough, then we can blame Stanton all we want. That's fine. But it's not about money. Like, you know who looks up payroll numbers at the end of the year? Nobody cares. They want to see how many games you won.
Right. And like, this has worked for teams in the past. Spending big does work. Like the Phillies 2 wins away from the World Series with the 4th highest payroll in 2022. The Braves had the 11th highest payroll last year and won a World Series. Like, it does help, right? But also the way that we need to look at this too is that, or the thing that we need to acknowledge here is that there isn't just one set way to building a championship caliber roster. And sometimes that is via the trade market. Right, you can do the heavy lifting via the trade market and end up getting guys who are worth 5-6 F4 by Fangraph standards, and they cost you the league minimum. Right, your big piece could be a league minimum guy or someone that's only making $3 or $4 million in arbitration.
Julio.
Right, you got to look at the quality of player, not the quality of the contract.
Right, like I don't get like. I would just put it like this, right? Let's say the Mariners sign Carlos Correa, right? And they get him for $7 and $210, just a nice, easy number, $30 million a year. Are you going to be mad that they didn't give him $32 million a year because they could have? Of course you're not. You don't care about the money. You care about the player. So this idea that like, the Mariners have to spend X amount this year to win the World Series. No, they don't. They could have won it this year. They were close. They probably, if they beat the Astros, they're playing in the World Series. Of that, I have no doubt. So, like, what are we talking about here? I don't care about the payroll. I don't. When I hear things like, "Hey, Jerry was told he had this," and then they pulled the rug out from under him, and they said, "Oh, well, actually, now it's down to this." That I care about. That's being cheap. That is something worth criticizing. But John Stanton saying, "Hey, Jerry, you're going to get $500 million to spend over the next 3 years on this team," which is going to be about, somewhere between 10th and 15th in payroll. That's where the Mariners need to be. Seattle is the 12th or 13th biggest media market in the country. It makes sense for them to have somewhere in the 10 to 15 range in terms of payroll. They are a mid-market club. And as much as the Mariners can spend $300 million, and they should, like if everything was just fair, but it's not. We know it's not going to happen. We know it's never going to happen. So every minute you spend talking about like, oh, well, they need to get up to 180, it's a waste of everybody's time. What is the arbitrary number? And by the way, they get up to 180. What are you going to do when they're 2 games out of the division? You're going to say, oh, well, they got to get up to 200 now. You're just going to keep moving it. It's an arbitrary line, and it doesn't determine success at all. Build a good team. And then whatever the money is at the end of the day, that's what it is. But we need to understand that Jerry Dipoto and Justin Hollander have budgets, and they just cannot write checks as much as we may want them to. John Stanton is not going to do that. No owner in professional sports is going to do that. That's just the reality.
Before we get to our last couple of items here, let me list the top 10 teams in payroll. Number 1, the New York Mets, $282.7 million.
You went further than them in the playoffs.
First wild card exit. The Los Angeles Dodgers at number 2, $275.6 million. They lost in the divisional round just like you. The New York Yankees, $264.9 million, despite having one of the greatest offensive performances in a regular season of all time from Aaron Judge. They got swept in the ALCS and looked like they didn't even really belong.
Your roster is better than the Yankees. Just straight up.
The Philadelphia Phillies, again, 2 wins away from the World Series. It does work. It does work.
Side note, do you feel like the Phillies are leaps and bounds ahead of the Mariners despite having spent $80 million more dollars?
Nope. And they were also the last team to get in to the playoffs on the National League side, right?
Yep.
The San Diego Padres got to the NLCS. Good for them, right? Again, one of the few teams that proves that it actually works. Now here's where things get a little shaky. The Boston Red Sox at number 6, $223.1 million. Terrible this year. Chicago White Sox, $208.3 million. Terrible this year. The Atlanta Braves, really good, but a divisional round exit. The Houston Astros, all right, it works, right? The Astros are really good. But then we get to the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. And whenever you talk about payroll, and this is a message to everyone, whenever you talk about payroll and wanting to get to a certain amount of money and you want to sign every single superstar there is on the free agent market, just remember the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim.
Yep.
Also, it's funny too because the same people, or a lot of the same people that pound the table for the Mariners to sign every superstar that hits the open market are the same people that are like, well, players come to Seattle and die, basically. This is where careers die, right? Same old Mariners, all that stuff. Yep. Anyway, so let's talk about roster construction this winter for the Mariners specifically. One thing that we hear a lot, and we heard this around the trade deadline as well, the Mariners need a left-handed reliever. They need a left-handed reliever because you need to get left-handed hitters out. But Colby, just because you throw from the left side doesn't mean that you're necessarily good against lefties, right?
No, it doesn't. First of all, we can acknowledge that, having a guy in your bullpen who's really good at getting lefties out, pretty valuable, particularly in the AL West when you're facing Shohei Ohtani and Yordan Alvarez and Kyle Tucker and Corey Seager and now Nathaniel Lowe. Like, you're facing a ton of these big power lefties. You need guys who can get those type of players out. Okay, that's fine. Why do they have to throw left-handed? Ty, if I told you that the Mariners went out and they added a pitcher this offseason who held lefties to a 167, 230, 284 triple slash this year in 56 games, you would say that guy is a lefty specialist. Like, those are elite numbers against left-handed pitching.
He's a loogie.
Yes, those are the splits of right-handed pitcher Seth Lugo this year, who happens to be a free agent. You don't have to throw.
Lugo?
Thanks for killing momentum. Appreciate it. Who was the Mariners' best reliever against lefties this year?
Eric Swanson.
Eric Swanson. What? Remind me what hand Eric Swanson throws a baseball with. It's his right hand. Like, you're telling me that you would rather have Ryan Borucki facing Yordan Alvarez because he's a lefty than Eric Swanson? Of course you wouldn't, because you're not stupid. You're not, right? Like, I don't think you are. You're listening to this podcast, but like, We all have our guilty pleasures, but I look at last year, right? Eric Swanson, 200, 222, 295 against lefties. He struck out 43 lefties in 109 plate appearances, walked 3.
Mhm.
You have your lefty specialist out in the pen. His name is Eric Swanson. Use him. You don't have to throw left-handed to get left-handed hitters out. I'm not saying you don't add a guy just because he's left-handed, but I'm also saying you don't add a guy just because he's left-handed.
Yeah. Well,
The
and
numbers matter more than the handedness.
And the thing too about, quite a few lefty specialists is that they're terrible against righties. And what use is that guy to you, especially now with the 3-batter minimum? Obviously, there's ways to circumvent that, but at the end of the day, you're getting a guy that has a very, very, very specific role, and roster spots are crucial, and especially when it comes to the bullpen, roster spots are crucial for this Mariners team in particular because they like to have a bigger bullpen. They like to play matchups. To me, again, like you're saying, I just want a guy that's good against both sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if that's a righty, if that's an Eric Swanson, if that's a Seth Lugo, then so be it. I don't care what side of the mound he throws from. I don't.
Like I said, you want some different looks out of your bullpen. That's fine. You want a guy who maybe, but you can get different looks all from the right side. You can have a fastball curveball guy, fastball slider guy, split guy. Somebody throws submarine. Somebody throws sidearm. Paul Sewald's kind of low 3/4. Like the windups are different. You want different looks out of your bullpen. They don't have to be left-handed. Write a list of the Mariners relievers you trust the most this offseason or this last year. I don't know how far you have to go down before you get to a lefty. 6 or 7, maybe 8. And is it Matt Boyd or is it Ryan Barucki? Because that's pretty much it. We know Mashevitz isn't that guy. So,
right.
Yeah, you don't need a lefty. You just need guys you just need good pitchers. If they happen to be lefty, great. But if you have a righty who can get lefties out, don't just look at that and be like, well, he doesn't throw left-handed. So, not really a fit here. That's dumb.
So lastly, we've talked and we're going to be talking even more about the big free agent shortstops. There's 4 of them. There's Trey Turner, there's Carlos Correa, there's Xander Bogaerts, and there's Dansby Swanson. And the Mariners have said publicly, we want one of those guys. But Colby, if they don't get one of those guys, did they fail this winter?
Not necessarily. It depends on what they do around the miss, right? It's one of those things. Like I think they've stated, they want to get one of those shortstops. Ideally one who would play second, but blah, blah, blah. That's lip service. They want to get one of those shortstops. They're going to be involved in the market for those shortstops. But there's going to be like 12 to 15 teams in the market for those shortstops, which means 10 or 11 are going to get, left at the altar, so to speak. So you can't just say, well, we have to get that guy or our offseason sucked. You have to have plan B. And that's why I think it's going to be important for the Mariners to strike early. They need to be aggressive on the shortstops. They need to know how soon they need to move on to plan B, but we'll get to that, I'm sure, in a later episode. But no, if they go out and they add, let's say they go out and they add a 3-win second baseman, they go get an outfielder who's worth 4 wins. They go get 2 relievers who are going to give them 1 win apiece. And then you kind of go out and you platoon or you kind of create your other outfield spot with a couple guys who you feel are going to be roughly 3 or 4 win players. You're telling me if you add 10 wins to this ball club without adding the shortstop, it's a bad off season? No, of course it's not.
And on top of that, if you're not spending big on a shortstop, whatever, maybe you go out and you get, really crazy with it and go at a starting pitcher, one of the few bigger name starting pitchers that are out on the market.
Maybe you can't get a shortstop to take your $35 million. Okay, can I get Carlos Rodon and Michael Conforto to take $35 million between
By
them?
the way, I want to clarify, I'm not saying Jacob deGrom. A lot of people are going to mistake that as me saying Jacob deGrom or Justin Verlander. I'm not saying either one of those names. No, stop it. Stop it.
DeGrom is a hard pass. Like, you want to pay $40 million a year for a guy who's going to give you 16 starts? Get out of here. That nonsense. But yeah, there are more ways you can attack this. I still think the best thing the Mariners could do, like the best offseason they could have, get one of the shortstops and then get a good outfielder, like a really solid outfielder, everyday guy. And then, kind of maybe you get a platoon in the other spot, maybe you re-sign Mechaniger, add a couple interesting arms. I think that's the best way they could go. But if we're sitting here on February 18th, and we're like, oh man, all they did was sign Brandon Nimmo and Zach Eflin, and they traded for Willie Adames, and oh look, Mitch Haniger's back, but he's going to DH mostly because they also went out and they traded for like Hunter Renfroe or Randy Arozarena or Taylor Ward. Like, are we going to sit here and be like, oh man, they suck? Like, total failure. Of course you're not. You're going to be amped. Just get good players, right? Yes, ideally you want the shortstop, but just get good players. Who cares what position they play? Get good players who are fits on your roster and just go from there. That's the only thing Mariner fans should care about.
Build a roster where we can conceivably say the Mariners have a chance to win the AL West.
Yep. And go from there.
Yep. Because also, you're not going to arrive at spring training with a perfect roster. You're not going to arrive at spring training with all your holes filled. It's just not going to happen.
I mean, look at the team that's currently leading the World Series. They still have holes on that roster.
They're a terrible defensive team. Terrible defensive.
They're
team.
so bad. They're so bad.
But they're playing actually pretty
really
good defense right now.
Yeah. It's just weird. Like, that's a bad defensive team. That is a team that's bullpen isn't exactly like terrifying. It's kind of a mediocre bullpen, honestly. Their starting pitching is good, not great, but they hit a lot of home runs and they're playing really well right now. It takes you all the way to the World Series and they're 2 wins away. You don't have to be a perfect team to win the World Series. You don't have to be a perfect team at any point in the year to win the World Series, but it's unrealistic for anybody to expect a team to be perfect on opening day.
Yeah,
that's just
the team on the cusp of winning the World Series is having Brad Hand throw high leverage innings for them out of the bullpen. So,
yeah, and it's working.
The Phillies are crazy. I'm having a lot of fun watching this World Series. By the way,
same.
By the way, can we stop with the whole like, what was Bryce Harper talking to Alec Bohm about? Can we stop with this thing? Like,
wow.
Why is it every postseason, like some pitcher starts tipping pitches and it's like, oh my God, it's a huge thing. Yeah, I know. We gotta hop off. But I'm just saying, man, can we
set me up all day to be the wet blanket so that he could sneak one here at the end when nobody's listening? I see how it works. Basically.
Yeah. But I mean, look, seriously, can we stop with like getting mind blown by pitchers tipping pitches? It happens all year long. Players, they pick up on it. Hitters pick up on it. It just happens, right? It's not some game-breaking thing. It's just, it is what it is, right? It is what it is. Stop making a huge deal about it. Who cares? Who cares what Bryce Harper talked to Alec Bohm about? Anyway, that's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Titan Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. And you can follow me at Dane Gonzalez, that's DaneGNZLZ, and Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Thank you again for making us your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast featuring the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts just like us. And with that, have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Peace.